Danny Dunn will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please bow. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for the weather. We thank you for us being here in Temple, Texas, and being able to represent you in your direction. We ask you to guide us, to guide our thoughts and guide our minds, and ask you to protect our families, keep them out of harm's way. Lord, watch over this council and the decisions they make today, and watch over this city as we make it a nice place for people to be that represents you and your direction. We ask all this in your Son's precious name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks to everyone for fitting this into your schedule today. Thanks to Council for making the time today. This is a little out of the ordinary for us, but also the occasion is very extraordinary. We have a very special item on the agenda to address today, and we're going to take this opportunity to address some budget items that we need to consider and begin to make feedback on. So we've got two items under the work session portion. We're going to take these in reverse order. The first item is discuss the proposed fiscal year 2012-2013 budget and related issues to include the various static and strategic and budget-related policy issues, the street CIP initiative, the residential curbside recycling program, drainage fund policies, rates and CIP, water and sewer funding policies, rates and CIP, and the budget development guidelines. And that's under item 3. Item 4 is to consider adopting a resolution authorizing a construction contract with James Construction Group, LLC of Belton, to construct the Northwest Loop 363 roadway project in an amount of $39,883,619.28. We will take that item first. And so, David?
I'd be happy to introduce the item, Mayor, and then turn it over to Tracy, and I think she's got some support also, but very excited to bring you this item today. The culmination of, I believe, work occurring at least since 1982, when we began looking at, as a community, the Northwest Loop as a transportation asset that was vital to the community and vital to, in particular, our business and industrial community and just transportation infrastructure in this region, for that matter. So the item that you have before you today, very briefly, I'll go over the project scope. You see it on the screens. I'm going to turn and look, because I don't think our screens are working up here. Upgrading approximately 4 miles of existing 2 lanes Northwest Loop, just west of the BNSF Railroad crossing to FM 2305. Again, all this is on the screens around you there, so you can see those. It does create a continuous 4-lane highway from Northwest Loop I-35 to Southwest Loop I-35. We've been working with TxDOT over the past several years on the scope and connectivity between I-35 and the Northwest Loop, and really the BNSF railroad overpass, excuse me, that's out there right now, and the I-35 design work that is, and construction work that's going on, is also in concert with the design work and the construction work that you're about to consider this afternoon also. So those have all been interlinked and planned consistently and collaboratively. It also includes grade separation and interchanges at SH State Highway 36 Airport and Windland Road, 2 new interchanges, or 1 new interchange and 1 redesigned interchange there, an overpass. And then largest single CIP project ever undertaken by the City of Temple, certainly in transportation mode. And Tracy's going to go over those numbers here in just a second, but we were estimating around a $50 million project, and that's about what it's going to come in at in terms of our transportation project. So with that, I'll stop. Happy to address any questions about the scope of the work or the project itself. But again, this great work that staff has done. So I don't forget later on, but I certainly want to thank Nicole, Public Works, Jonathan and Legal, Tracy and Finance. I shouldn't have started because I'm going to forget folks, but it really has been a multi-department, multidisciplinary effort on the part of staff to get this project to you today. So I want to say thanks to all the staff for the work that they did, and certainly to our consulting engineers too. Bill Hicks is here with, I keep wanting to say the wrong name, Lochner engineering firm, and they certainly have been instrumental in helping us get to this point also. So lots and lots of folks, and that's just the folks that are here today. Again, I think we have to go back through the archives, and the list would be as long as this room is, the number of people who have touched this project in some way, shape, form, or fashion to get it to today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy and let her walk through her presentation.
Okay, thank you, David. I could get Shannon to pull that up quickly. As she's pulling that up, in the past 2 days, I've been trying to simplify, hopefully I come up with a simplified explanation of how this is funded.
I'm sorry, Tracy, I can't figure out which one it is. That's the one we got.
Pass-through financing.
That one. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. I wanted to look at, when reviewing the fiscal impact of the construction contract and the project, wanted to look at 4 areas. First, the construction contract, the total project cost, project funding, and then the pass-through financing bonds that are actually priced and issued this morning to fund the project. Next slide, the construction contract is, the mayor just read it, the total contract awards $39,883,619. The first $20 million of that construction contract will be funded by direct payments from TxDOT. And then, in addition to that, TxDOT will fund $16,555,000 through the pass-through agreement, which that will be paid over time. And the gap on the construction contract for City of Temple to fund is $3,328,619. Next slide just looks at the total project cost. Total project cost is $53.5 million. That includes the construction contract for $39.8 million. We've added contingency for the project. We have engineering, right-of-way, utilities, relocation that are the City of Temple's, and then utilities private relocation of $2.6 million, and environmental mitigation. Again, all of those total up to $53.5 million. Next slide, I'll look at the project funding. There's several sources of funding for this project. Again, the TxDOT reimbursements of the pass-through financing of $16,555,000, the $20 million of Category 12 funds from TxDOT, and then we have City of Temple direct contributions of $16.9 million, and that brings the project total funding to $53.5 million. The fourth set of numbers I want to go over is the actual pass-through financing bonds. On April 5th, Council authorized a delegation ordinance to issue those bonds an amount not to exceed $35 million. These bonds will fund the $9,222,000 of additional funds needed from the City of Temple. On the left side, I have a detail of what that includes. It includes the gap on the construction contract and some other costs that we've already incurred related to the project. And then we have to fund the $16,555,000 that we'll get back from TxDOT over time once the project's completed. We turn that over to TxDOT and they begin paying the city back. The minimum time is 10 years and it's not to exceed a time of 20 years. And the amount that we needed total to deposit to the construction fund to complete the funding of this project was $25,777,584. Again, I have Jennifer Douglas with Spiffy here tonight to go over the details of that transaction. And I'll introduce Jennifer now if you'd like to go over that. While she's going up to the podium, I did have a pie chart that shows the total funding, and it shows that out of the $53.5 million, 68% of that was funded by TxDOT and 32% by City of Temple. Jennifer?
Thank you, Tracy. Again, I'm Jennifer Douglas with Specialized Public Finance, or SPIFFy, easier to remember. I passed around a booklet here that has a summary of both some refunding bonds that we'll talk about in a bit, as well as the pass-through financing. The pass-through financing is behind tab B, but I did want to call your attention to the very front of the book before tab A. There's an interest rate chart that I think Dan and I are trying to get used to us showing to you. But obviously, even though a large portion of this project is being funded by TxDOT, you are still funding a portion of it, so interest rates are certainly a sensitive and important matter to you all. And I wanted to point out that we're here on this blue chart at the far right-hand side of the page. This is a 20-year composite average interest rate. And as you can see, over the last couple of years, even almost last 12 months, we'll say, we've reached a kind of a high point peak back there toward the end of 2010, early 2011, and then some more peaks and valleys, and actually we've come back down now on the far right-hand side, you can see, to pretty much the lowest point in the market that we've had in 60 years. So if you're going to price a bond, it's obviously a very good time to price a bond. It's sort of the summary there of that statistic. Turning to tab B, just to kind of follow up briefly on what Tracy had mentioned, we obviously did go out in the bond market today to price this issue for the city. The underwriters consisted of BOSC, Raymond James, and Fidelity. The pricing summary is on the next page here, shows you what the average interest rate or the true interest cost, which is that last line there. That for this bond issue, which has a maturity of 22 years, the average interest rate that we're paying there at the very bottom right-hand side of the page is at 3.62%. So obviously lower than the estimates that we've been looking at, and certainly better for the city otherwise. Turning to page 2 there, the sources and uses, as Tracy had pointed out, you are funding $25,777,584 for the project itself. The bonds themselves are $24,700,000, which I know seems obviously strange that we're funding more than we're actually borrowing. And that's a function of the bond markets and the premium, which is the way the underwriters price the bonds. They actually have a higher coupon and a lower yield to basically be able to resell the bonds out in the bond market. So you are still receiving the $25,777, even though we're actually only funding $24.7. We also have a line item in there of $1.8 million for capitalized interest. You won't start receiving your payments from TxDOT until 2015. So this $1.8 million is basically to get the city through the first couple of years before those payments start coming back from TxDOT. So we have the debt service schedule here on the next page. I'm going to show you a different summary of that. If you flip to the very end of the book, which is probably a more useful page for you all, you can see basically we've layered this into your existing debt, your existing tax-supported debt, as well as taking out some of the payments that you're receiving for those 11 notes, and then taking out the TxDOT lease revenues there. And it kind of shows you, based on assumptions that we have for the estimated growth and the assessed valuation, what this looks like in terms of your tax rate here. You can see on the far right-hand side. So this is assuming that we get $1.2 million from TxDOT. Obviously, we have a range that could go as high as $1.5 million, depending upon traffic counts. But this is our best assumption at this point in time. And this obviously incorporates the pricing from today as well as the refunding as well. So we think that this is hopefully something that will please you, certainly less than what we've been looking at before, but you got lucky and hit a good time in the market, and then Tracy obviously did a very good job at her estimates as well. We don't require council action because, again, it was a delegation, so we'd be happy to answer any questions, but I think the attorneys, as we speak, are hurriedly getting together documents for you to sign that we'll probably be able to sign after the meeting.
We also sold the refinancing bonds
Yes,
today as
sir,
well?
and I can address those now or at a later point in the meeting. It's up to you all.
If you're,
That was just fine.
yeah.
Yeah, you're up. So,
More good news, right?
Yep.
So, well, behind tab A, we sold the week of May 14th refunding bonds to the city. Again, this is something that Dan had talked to you all about probably 2 months ago, again through a delegation authority. And the idea there is obviously you all are familiar with doing refinancing for the city, but for the taxpayers here in attendance, we essentially are doing the same as refinancing a mortgage because interest rates have dropped to the point that we discussed earlier in the market. The city is able to take advantage of lower interest rates in the market and save taxpayer money, essentially, by refinancing the existing bonds with the lower interest rate. There's no stretching out of the debt. There's nothing strange happening. We're simply taking a higher interest rate and replacing it with a lower rate. So we priced, again, the week of May 14th. We're in a position to close June 7th. We couldn't price these two issues together because the IRS has ruled that they have to be 15 days apart, so that's why we had to separate them. Otherwise, they consider it to be one bond issue for yield arbitrage purposes as well as for advanced refunding purposes. So it makes sense for you all to have them 15 days apart. So that's why we had to do it separately. The pricing summary here, we were refinancing 5 separate issues. Your 2002 revenues, your 03 CO, the 2003 GO and refunding bonds, as well as the 2006 CO and the 2006 revenue bond. Not all of those, but portions of those that made the most sense. Those had interest rates on these old bonds between 3.375% and 5%. And if you look here on this pricing summary, again, down at the very last line where it says true interest cost, the new rate that we have on those combined issues is at 2.71%. So again, contrast that to the old rates of between 3.375 and 5%, and that 2.71 is what you'll now be paying. And when you turn the page to the debt service comparison, this is the amount of money the city will be saving. This is between the funds, and we'll get into the separation between the different funds. But on page 2 there behind tab A, the city, as a result of this refinancing, after all the fees and costs have been paid, will save just over $2.5 million, $2,591,119 to be exact. So that's the money back to the city. On a percentage basis, that represents 8.2% savings over what you had been paying before the refinancing. And if we turn it to the next page, you can see that on the tax rate, you'll be saving $602,000. That's the allocation of the bonds that were refinanced that have been paid for from the general fund or the INS tax rate. And then for the utility fund itself, you're saving $1.9 million or 8.489%. And that's simply a function of we were refunding a larger amount of those utility bonds than of the tax bonds. But certainly as the opportunity comes up for tax bonds in the future, we'll be looking to get savings there as well. There's some more schedules here. It kind of shows you what bonds were refinanced and the interest rates that they've been paying. I won't go into too much detail on that, but overall, I think Dan usually puts in the documents a 3% savings threshold. So certainly to be above 8% is very strong, and we're very excited to be able to do that for the city.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Dan. Questions from the council?
I have one for Tracy. When you talk about the contract being $39 million, the state's putting in $20 million up front, then paying the $16, and there's a $3 million gap. What about the remainder between the $39,000 and the $53, which is $14 million? So basically, what's the total out of pocket for the city, I guess you would say?
A little over 16 million.
So 3 plus the 14, that's almost 17 million. Okay.
To be exact, 16,976,000.
Other questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good sale today. Thanks.
That's all, unless you have other questions?
I was just going to point out, also in the packet, wasn't mentioned, but is the latest bond that we have, correct?
Yes.
And, no, that's okay, I was just going to highlight a couple of things out of there. One is we reaffirmed a AA rating, which is very good. I want to quote a couple of things out of Standard & Poor's rating review. The rating reflects our view of the city's strong regional economy with favorable location on I-35, historically strong finances that are projected to remain strong, and strong financial management practices. And then on the outlook, I'm just reading straight from the report, the stable outlook also reflects our opinion that the city will likely maintain what we consider its very strong finances, which we believe is key to maintaining the rating. So again, I want to say thanks to everyone who had a hand in making sure that that rating was maintained. Those are not easy things to acquire, and they're even harder to maintain. So I wanted to highlight that also.
Appreciate that. Thanks. If there are no other questions, comments, this item requires action. It's to adopt a resolution authorizing the construction contract with James Construction Group LLC of Belton to construct the Northwest Loop 363 roadway project in amount of $39,883,619.28.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, for approval of the resolution. Further questions or comments? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Cloud?
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Schneider?
Aye.
Councilmember Morales?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Let me add my thanks and appreciation to Bill Hicks and your entire organization for working with us, to Jennifer and all those at Spiffy, and thanks to Dan for us as well. And congratulations to everyone. Congratulations to James on the good bid, and we look forward to working with you and completing the largest CIP project in the history of our community. So thank you very much. And thanks to lots of councils and lots of reinvestment zone folks and people over the last 25-plus years for help to bring this to this point. It's a very exciting time for the city of Temple. Let the work begin. All right. With that item completed, we'll move into the other item on the agenda today, and this is more along the lines of budget workshop matters, and I've already read that item into the record, so David, you can pick where you want to start.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do appreciate council being willing to allow me to stretch a 15 or 20-minute meeting into a little bit longer meeting than that today. To talk about some budget items, and direct budget items, but also some related budget items. And so I'm going to start really at the bottom of the workshop agenda there. Budget development guidelines are just budget overview. And then we'll kind of work our way pretty much up that order, although I'll take a little bit out of order on that. But after I'm finished, then we'll turn it back over to Tracy and let her talk a little bit about water and sewer fund policies and water and sewer rates and CIP work associated with that. Your budget, FY13 budget, that process has been underway, as you have heard me say before, almost year-round process for us on budgeting. But these months in the spring and summer are high gear from the staff standpoint, and I really do, again, appreciate the work that the staff does to get the budget put together. As we march toward June 29th, which is when I will turn over a budget to you, and then the month of July, you get to work with it. But let me just go through the slides, and we'll go through them fairly quick. Some of these you've seen before. I tried to use, in essence, the same format and some of the content that you saw in March when we last did a budget overview, to kind of give you a preview about what I was working through March, April, and now most of May. And so I'm just picking it back up here at the end of May. Mission, vision, strategic focus areas, we'll certainly talk about that throughout budget as we go forward. Budget calendar, I'm going to go over that briefly. I gave you some departmental issue papers back in March, as you may recall. Every year I ask the departments to identify issues for me going into the budget, and then we begin working on prioritizing and better identification of those issues. I'm going to give you those issue papers. I highlighted a few of those in March, and I'm going to give you my comments on those issues today versus March, because I've had 2 or 3 months now to be looking at those. And then one more time, I'm going to lay off the fence post as I get into really kind of a final glide path for budget development. So it's important to me to know that those fence posts haven't moved on me as I get into that position. Next slide. That's just the visual for your strategic plan. I have been going around the city for the past 2 weeks or so, briefing employees on budget, and that's in the presentation. It's the first slide, a substantive slide in the presentation, and we walk through that again to make sure everyone knows that's what we're about, that's what we're doing. The 4 focus areas are important. The one I've focused heavily on in the budget briefings with employees this year has been expanding the tax base, because I think we've got some really significant things going on. All of those things are important. All of those things we're working on, but expanding the tax base is one that highlighted this year in terms of discussions with employees. Next slide. The budget calendar, that May 17th date is now May 24th. That's today. We slipped that 1 week to May 24th, but that's the work session that we're in today. On June 29th, I've already mentioned I'll file a budget with the city secretary. At that point, as you've heard me say before, I turn that over to you, and I really consider the budget after that point your budget. and it is to do with as you wish. You can add things to it, you can take things from it, you can leave it alone. It is your pleasure what you do during the month of July. My only guidance to you is that just a friendly reminder that we're not the federal government, so it has to balance. So whenever you get through it, the revenues and the expenses have to match up, and they always have, and they always will. And then we've got workshops scheduled again, month of July. Those are purely at your discretion. After the July 5th work session, I'll give you an overview at that meeting of what I filed on the 29th. The budget last year, I think, was 400 and something pages. Won't do a 400-page PowerPoint presentation for you on the 5th, but I will give you some highlights of that that has been filed just a few days earlier. After that date, I will schedule a work session for any regular meeting that you have, and certainly if you need to schedule any special meetings, we can do that, and we'll schedule it also. But at that point in time, after the 5th, I will be in a reactive mode and a responsive mode. So you tell me what you need, and that's what we'll try to provide. Next slide. In August, August 2nd is always a very significant date, or the first meeting in August, because that's typically when you set the preliminary tax rate. And that tax rate is very significant in the sense that you can change that or modify that, but it gets difficult as we get further into August. So very important date, August 2nd, and then of course public hearings, and then ultimately adoption on August 30th and setting of the tax rate. August is not impossible to make changes in the budget in August, but much, much more difficult. So I'd really encourage you, if you do see things you want to modify or change in the budget, that July is really the best month to make those changes versus August. Next slide. Those are the fence posts I gave you back in March that I would be working under as I worked with department heads as we went forward in budget development the past 3 months almost now. Maintaining our fiscal soundness, maintaining our core services, focusing on our people, and then aligning our strategic, financial, and tactical plans, or our work plans, the work plans that the departments have to go out and do things. Those have been at the focal point of discussions and budget meetings and budget submissions since that date. So I'm still working under those fence posts. And at some point today, if you want to talk about those in more detail, I do have some slides that are at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to go back to what any of those mean in more detail, I'd be happy to do that, but I'm not going to do it in this part of the presentation. You just tell me if you want to talk more about, well, what does fiscal soundness mean? Well, I can pull up some slides and we can talk about what I indicated to you in March those meant to me at that time, and those haven't changed, at least from my perspective. Next slide. I mentioned the departmental issue papers. Every year, as I go into the budget process, January, February timeframe, formally anyway, I ask the departments to begin thinking about issues that they see in front of them and submit those. They submitted 124 issues back at that time. I placed all those in your Dropbox back in March. They were unedited, and no recommendations. They were just, this is what the departments had given me. I have now finished my first run-through with the department heads. First run-through budget meeting was this week, I think, so we finished all of those up. So I've got most of those issues, at least first blood on those have been drawn, so I kind of know what I've got in front of me at this moment in time. So what I wanted to do is pull back up some of the issues I gave you in March, just to update those for you, to see what I've got, what kind of comment, if any, I've got, and if it's different than what I told you in March. Next slide. So fire. One of the issues I sampled for you out there last time was that we had some overtime issues in the fire department, and we identified that back in March. Fairly significant overtime issues, and at that time I said I thought there were multiple causation factors associated with that. Our ALS certification requirements, making sure that we maintain our ALS service level. Opening of Station 8, we opened a new station, moved some firefighters around that were deployed in different areas to make that work. And also minimum staffing levels that are set by the department in terms of the minimum number they need to have on shift on any given day on any given shift. Those are the comments I made to you back in March. Today, what I would tell you is causation is still related to multiple factors. After we have dug into that a little bit deeper, I don't think there is necessarily a single cause. I think there were multiple causes associated with the overtime. The biggest factor is what I call known unknowns, things that I think we knew would occur, but we didn't know to what level they would occur. And those known unknowns, we didn't necessarily quantify or accurately quantify or identify back in last year's budget. So I think that's something, and we're still working on that. I'm not to the point where I can tell you exactly what the cause is or what the suggested fix is associated with that, but we will be tackling that, and we'll have a recommendation when the budget's filed, no later than when the budget's filed. Next slide. Police and CID staffing, that was issued, identifies an issue, 15 officers currently assigned to CID. At that time, up to 2,400 cases a year coming into the Detectives Division, about a 1,400 case backlog, and current staffing levels could effectively manage maybe about 1,600. That's what was indicated back in March. My comment then was my community expectations relative to service levels were something we're going to have to address, meaning that how we were managing our investigations and how we were attacking the backlog and managing that were all issues that we needed to address in this next budget. And I don't have any additional comments to make on that. I think those are still accurate. I think that initial assessment still holds true as we've gotten in through many of the police department budget meetings. Next slide. Planning and development, I had that on the list of slides in March, just talking about the need for our building and site plan review process. That's sort of somewhat fragmented. It does lead some inefficiencies and some oversights, not being able to catch things after they've gone through our processes. Our current technology in building permits is somewhat lacking in terms of reporting and tracking capabilities. And that leads to potentially some delays in the building and development industry. Now, having said that, I would still put our processes and our timelines up against anybody in terms of how quickly things go through our process. But that doesn't ever mean we should be satisfied with where we're at. I mean, we can do it better. So as I said in March, I agree, and that we likely would be looking at perhaps some user fee increases to address service level expectations. If the building and development community would like to see things move more efficiently and faster through the process, and that requires some things that we don't have right now, then perhaps there might be some fees associated with that to get to those ends. And I same comment then as I did, or now as I did then. Next slide. Parks. I told you back in March that we had some structural failures at Santa Fe Depot. We had structural engineering analysis and a geotech analysis associated with that. There were significant cost estimates, ranges being thrown around about what it was going to cost to repair. My comments at that time was that was a casualty of the drought of 2011, and I still believe that based on the reports that I've seen still. The drought had a significant impact in the soil conditions around that depot, and I think it contributed, and I think other reports indicate that also. I also indicated that I believe the depot to be a significant community asset and that it was an issue we might need to address prior to the adoption of the 2013 budget. And I would stand by all those comments as of this day. We're still on those same tracks, so to speak. Next slide. Drainage services. I mentioned back in March that in 2008 we adopted a drainage master plan that identified 104 projects spanning 60-plus years and $160 million. And that our current funding approach for that was an incremental fee, which is now at $3 a month, and that it was pay-as-you-go for the projects. So we were, Nicole can correct me, but I believe we're on about Michael, on about a 72-year pace for getting those projects done. So, and that's just the math. That's how it works. My comments to you in March were it might be time to revisit that. That being both our funding and our project approach, and see if that was still something that council was comfortable with, in both the fees and associated with that, the work that we can do and how fast we can get to that work. So, same comments today, and you have a specific item later on the workshop agenda to talk about drainage fund policies, rates, and CIP. So we're going to delve into that a little bit more detailed here in just a minute. Next slide. Water and sewer rates, we've done outside rate analyses in 2003 and again in 2006. Finance does the rate analyses in-house every year. They take a look at it to make sure things are okay. But it is time periodically to do outside rate analysis. And my comments in March were that the rates always need to support both our operations and maintenance as well as our CIP projects. I think we have done a good job on the CIP side over the past decade or so, maybe not quite as good on the O&M side. So that was an issue that I wanted to address, and I have the same comments today, and you have an agenda item following this briefing today also on water sewer fund policy rates and CIP, so we're going to dive into that in a little bit more detail here in just a moment too. Next slide. I mentioned back in March that fuel costs were a significant issue for us. They have been a significant issue for us for over the past several years. We budgeted about $1.9 million for fuel in this year's budget. If you remember some of the charts and pie charts I showed you in the past, but about half of that fuel is solid waste. That's our primary fuel user in the city. Forecasts for the fuel at that point in the year were somewhat ominous in terms of what those fuel costs were projected to be. My comments in March were also that cost of fuel impacts services and service delivery, and I've asked every department in the city to have a fuel conservation plan, and that plan is triggered by a variety of mechanisms, and I let each department identify what kind of stages they would propose to get to a certain level of savings. And the savings that I try to target is about 15%, so that if we get to fuel prices go up, gallons go, whatever it is that triggers us to go up, that we start trying to hit a 15%, incrementally hit a 15% savings mark. All of the departments have developed the plans. We've implemented and executed on those plans several times since those plans have been adopted, and I would say that they're working. When those execute, we save fuel, and we've been able to stay. Tracy can also add to the conversation if you want to talk more about fuel, but we're doing very well on our budget this year on fuel, in part because of the fuel conservation practices that the departments are exercising. Comment I would add today, one more comment from March was that I thought we needed to explore alternative fuels as a long-term approach toward creating a more sustainable platform for services and service delivery. My objective was to try to diversify our fleet a little bit so that we're not necessarily totally dependent on one fueling source, petroleum. We've got a pilot program underway right now for propane use in a few vehicles, and we're doing our due diligence right now on a CNG initiative that I briefed you on about a month or so ago. I think both those hold some promise for us. Not willing or able, I shouldn't say not able at this point to give you a recommendation on the CNG, but I do believe in the next few weeks or months we'll be able to do so. Next slide. Health insurance. This is an issue that I didn't mention to you back in March, but I thought it appropriate to mention it today. We went fully insured about a year and a half ago or so. We were fully insured up until about a year and a half ago. We moved to a self-funded plan. The objectives for moving to that self-funded plan were really threefold. One was to better understand, identify, and try to control our own cost, try to be a little bit more master of our own destinies to the degree that we can with healthcare. We also wanted to better manage our cost drivers. If we know what those cost drivers are in our health plan, then maybe we can manage those a little bit better. But we need to identify those and then manage them. And then we also were hoping for a better experience in costs overall versus a fully insured plan. And I think today what I would tell you that all of those are being achieved so far, and I would still say it's early. I mean, we're about 18 months worth of experience or so in the health insurance, in the self-funded plan. But I would say all of those things are better today than they were prior to being self-funded. So we are achieving those objectives now. But all that said, costs keep going up. It's healthcare and health insurance, and so we still have some issues to address in that we're going to have to address in the next budget. Next slide. And then another one that I wanted to just mention also, employee compensation and benefits. I didn't have that in the March slides, but the market for public sector employees has clearly been moving over the past few years, and asked staff to do some work internally about that just to kind of get a sense of what that market has done. I don't know what I'll be able to recommend in that regard this year, but I do want us to be cognizant of the fact that the market has not been static. And it's been several years since we've done any kind of base adjustment across the board or across positions necessarily. And I think we're going to have to try to find a way to meaningfully address that as soon as we can. So, next slide. And that's my last slide. So that's kind of my quick overview of where I'm at in the budget right now, the calendar, and then some of those issues that I highlighted for you back in March, and then a couple more that I'd highlight for you today. Be happy to pause here for a second, address any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we'll launch right into the water and sewer fund policies and rates discussion. Okay.
Move on.
Water and sewer. While Tracy's getting set up for that, we also have a guest here, Mr. David Yockey from, I'm gonna say the wrong name of the firm here, because for years and years, I've worked, yes, show me a stick and give you something, it's with SAIC Energy, Environment, and Infrastructure, LLC. I liked it better when it was just Risto and Yockey.
The old name was a lot easier.
Yeah, it was just a lot easier to say. It was. I've known Dave for many, many years, working in several cities and work that he's done, so I certainly appreciate his assistance in our water and sewer rate review that he's done for us this time. Just to set the backdrop for this, as I said in one of the slides, we need to review our rates periodically, really from the outside. It helps us in multiple ways, and we need to make sure always that we're setting our rates to recover our cost of doing business. And doing business involves our operating and maintenance, and it also involves our projects. And we've been very healthy on our CIP project work relating to water and sewer over the past several years. I think in the neighborhood of, $60 million packages.
60 million plus.
$60+ million packages for water and sewer CIP, and that's all fine and good. Certainly our system needed the work, and some of that was expanding capacity, and connectivity, and adding storage, and adding lines, and all that. That's all good, and was, again, necessary. But you need to review those projects from time to time and make sure that your O&M and your rates and your projects are all lining up and that you're recovering what you need to recover. So with that, let me turn over to Tracy and then I'll let her launch from there.
I just have a few comments before turning it over to Mr. Yockey, but we engaged SAIC in February to do this project as part of the budget development process. They were asked to do a 5-year projection, revenue requirements on 5 years. They used our FY 2012 operations and data as their base year. And then again, went out 4 more years, or 5 years. And as of today, this report has not been delivered. It's still in draft form. And David had asked that they come in and present what their preliminary results are based on our budget development submission process. And it includes some staffing, additional staffing at the water treatment plant. We looked at our current CIP packages based on the current water and wastewater master plan. I'm going to let Dave go through his presentation, look at the draft rates and recommendations, and then we'll answer any questions you might have related to that.
Let me add just one more quick note. On all of the items that you're going to be briefed on today, I'm not looking for any action taken by council. This is posted as a workshop, and so the intent is to provide you with information today. If you've got additional questions or information that you'd like to have, just let us know. We'll try to get that to you. What I'm looking for today is just to try to get your level of understanding and awareness of these particular areas, in particular the water and sewer fund, drainage fund, our street CIP, and our curbside recycling program. I just want to give you some information today about that so that hopefully within the next couple or 3 weeks, you can let me know if you've got some significant issues with what you hear today in terms of direction that we're moving. But there's no action taken today. Again, intended to convey knowledge and information so that your awareness level is raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yockey, welcome back.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Listening to your agenda and what you've got on your schedule, it looks like you have a pretty full plate. So I'm going to go through my presentation and hit the key items. I want to emphasize this can be very informal. So as I go through, if you want more detail, just feel free to interrupt me and ask any questions that you may have. So, next slide, please. So what this is, and is it on everybody's screen there?
It is.
Okay, good, thank you. So what this is, as was mentioned by Tracy, we've taken your fiscal year 2012 budget and we're basically forecasting it out for 5 years. So at a high level, if you look at it, your current budget's around $26.6 million, growing to about, $29.5 million. So over that 5-year period, it's about a $3 million increase. So, a 10% increase over 5 years is pretty good. Next slide, please. So what are the cost components? A lot of times with water utilities, wastewater utilities, again, it's something kind of taken for granted because so many of the assets are out of sight, they're underground. So what are your assets? What are the costs in here in the utility? The raw water purchases with Brazos River Authority, the water treatment of that water, the distribution of it, then on the sewer side, the collection of it, the treatment of it, and then the discharge of it back into the environment in a clean manner. Debt service to fund those projects that are not funded through cash capital outlays. Your utility billing office and metering, which are critical to making sure, as I always say, that's your cash register, so you need to make sure your metering and utility business office is current and accurate. And then overall administration and purchasing. Next slide, please. I've talked about some of the categories. What are some of the drivers for costs? As was mentioned, there's additional staff in the water treatment plant of approximately $200,000 that's projected for the next fiscal year. You have the normal inflationary factors that will occur in the marketplace with regard to, we heard about labor, but also electricity, chemical costs. Those are major factors for water and wastewater utilities. Your cash capital outlays, the good thing that you have in place is you can see what we've broken out as far as cash capital outlays for water and wastewater. And that's about $2 million a year. And those include such things as replacing minor lines, equipment, automobiles, things like that. Again, for some of those items that you can cash finance and you build that into your rate, then you don't have to issue debt and pay interest on that money. So to have a certain amount of capital projects funded through cash that comes through your rates, that's a very good thing. Next slide, please. The debt service, again, debt service is a necessary component, so you balance that with cash capital outlays. If you look here, we broke out your water and wastewater debt into existing and proposed bond issues, and you can see on the water that there is a projected bond issuance in 2014, so you have the principal and interest kicking in of about $554,000, and then in total it would go up to about $900,000 with a second bond issue in fiscal year 2016. Similarly, down on the wastewater side, you'll see we have a proposed bond issue with the first principal and interest kicking in 2014 of about $768,000, and then a second bond issue in 2016 of $1.8 million. The one good thing on the wastewater side, if you look at existing debt, you can see it's actually dropping off with the payment off of a bond issue in 2014. So a $3 million, if you look in the existing bond issue for wastewater in 2013, it's at $3,005,000. Actually drops to $1.9 million. So actually, if you look at it, your wastewater debt service actually stays relatively stable over the 5-year period in that $3 million to $3.3 million range. Next slide, please. Okay. What we always like to do when we're doing a 5-year forecast, to look at what are we envisioning, what's the status of the water utility and wastewater utility. And as was mentioned earlier by David, one of the things is the financial integrity of the city. For us, that's always critical when we're looking at the utility. What's the financial situation of the utility? So what happens if we don't have any rate increase on the water side? You can see in fiscal year 2012, you're okay. You still are, based on a normalized year, going to have an over-recovery of about $322,000. But as you go out, you have, in 2013, if you don't do anything to raise rates, there'll be about an $800,000 under recovery, about a $1.2 million under recovery in the next 3 years, each year. So in total, you'd have a little over $4 million in under recovery on the water side, okay? And again, that's assuming that you're doing those bond issues in 2014 and 2016. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side, if you keep the rates as they are, you actually have an under recovery of about $1.5 million in the current year, okay, which right now can be absorbed through your reserves because you do have reserves, which, again, the utility's in good financial shape, so you can absorb it on a temporary or short-term basis. And then the shortfall actually goes down in 2014 to about $600,000, and again, that's because of that debt service that we showed you earlier that was getting paid off. But then it does grow again by 2016, so you're back up at about a $1.5 million shortfall if you do nothing with regard to changing rates. Next slide, please. So when we start looking at, okay, that's our status, we want to start looking at what would be proposed rates if you were looking at, over the 5-year period, what to do. Again, one of the things that we identified, and it's very common for water utilities, is you want to increase your minimum bill in proportion to the demand that that meter can take on your system. And what do I mean by that? It's very common for water utilities that you have a 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter, and then you go up to maybe 8-inch meters, 10-inch meters. The amount of water they can take grows exponentially based on the size of that meter. And the city has to be ready to provide service to meet the demand at that meter. Your city already has the minimum bills increasing, but if you look at the ratios set out in the American Water Works Association M1 manual, we proposed tweaking those rates and those ratios, and I'll show that to you shortly. And again, that's per standards that are laid out by the American Water Works Association, which is the basically the trade association or the educational association for water utilities. The other thing we talked about is if you're going to do something, and what we laid out as far as proposed rate changes, we would propose that the increases occur in the minimum bill. That is the monthly bill you pay every month. We'll show that to you in a little bit. And that's to increase or improve the overall revenue stability. Because if you look at the percentage of your revenue that comes in from your water and wastewater utility in the minimum bill, it's a fairly low percentage in the 20 to 22, 23%. A lot of times you try to get that up into around the 30% range to protect you from revenue volatility. And I know you may say, well, we've been in a drought and we have been all over this state, but wet years do come, and when they do, it can create revenue shortfalls, so there's a balance there. And we'll address that in our proposed rates. Next slide, please. So, these are the rates that we would propose in the 5-year forecast. We have the 5-year forecast that we laid out for the budget. These rates ensure the financial integrity of the utility. You're looking at one rate increase in fiscal year 2014. And if you look at that, and we'll take the residential customer, the average residential customer has a 5/8 inch to 3/4 inch meter. And so right now they pay $10 per month, and that includes 2,000 gallons of water. We are proposing that in fiscal year 2014, so not for your upcoming fiscal year that you're going to be addressing on the budget, but in another year, that's increased by $2.50 per month. And we'll show what that means for the average bill on a percentage basis and absolute dollars here in just a couple minutes. And then you can see we've adjusted the minimum bills on a proportional basis also and tweaked those so they're in alignment with the AWWA standards. you can see that as the meter size increases, the dollar amount of the increase goes up, okay? So for instance, if you look at the 1-inch meter right below there, that would go from $13.95 to $20. So you look at that, the minimum bill goes up. I will tell you, as you look at, and this is the good part of the story, as you have larger meters, you have a larger meter for a reason. People are taking more water. There are no proposed rate increases in the volumetric rate on the water rates for the 5 years. It's only in the minimum bill. So when you look at the overall bill in total dollars, you'll see the percentage increase is much smaller than you would expect. The one thing I want to touch on very quickly, you do have on 2-inch meters, and everybody's always sensitive to the residential customers, and I understand that. For your average residential user that has a 5/8 inch to a 3/4 inch meter, which are like 95 to 98% of your customers, it's a very modest increase that's projected in fiscal year 2014. Some of you, if you look there, you'll look at the 2-inch meter for a residential, it's going from $28.85 to $80 a month. And that is going to be your overall largest percentage increase on the average bill. And this is where I just have to provide an editorial comment, and these come free. Residential customers, you just don't see them with 2-inch meters. That is a very large size meter for a residential account to have. And the only reason you have a meter like that is they have to have a very large property and they're doing a lot of irrigation. And this is the side when we come to the water conservation and maximizing our finite resources. If a residential account has a 2-inch meter for irrigation purposes, they are pumping a lot of water through that meter. And honestly, the going up on the minimum bill is very justified for that type of customer. Okay. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side, the only increase is in fiscal year 2014. Again, when the minimum bill would increase from $10 to $14, we did also propose here, I told you on the water, no increase in the volumetric rates for 5 years. On the wastewater, there would be a volumetric increase of 25 cents, going from $4.25 to $4.50 in 2014. So again, in the 5-year forecast, only one increase in 2014. And next slide, please. What does that mean on the water side? If those increases were approved at $12.50 in 2014, you can see that the utility overall for that 5-year period, it under-recovers briefly in 2013 because the rates weren't raised yet, but overall it gets back to having a positive balance. Okay? Next slide, please. On the wastewater side, again, similar story. Remember, if you look at that prior slide, we had talked about being under-recovering in 2012, the $1.5 million. That under-recovery would continue in 2013, but in 2014 and 2015, you have positive over-recovery, and then in 2016, you're basically at break-even there. So next slide, please. Combined, what that shows is with the proposed rate increases, in 2012-2013, you'd be drawing down on your reserves in those first 2 years about $3 million. But then when the rate increases kick in 2014, you're able to basically recover that $3 million, put that back into the reserve, and you're at a positive balance, positive cash flow. Next slide, please. So, stepping back before I go into the average bills, the point is, one rate increase in 2014, and your reserves at the end of 2016 are where they are now, with your operating reserves at about $7 million, which is very good. What does this mean for the average residential user? What it means for them, if you look at the residential bill, right now for 5,411 gallons of water that's paid for, and one thing we should have made a little clearer here, that actually means this is the average bill for somebody that uses about 7,400 gallons, because the first 2,000 is included in your minimum bill, and then you're paying a volumetric rate on that 5,400 gallons. So right now, that person would pay $27.32. In 2014, they would have a rate increase to $29.82, or about a 9% increase. So what you're looking at is over this 5-year period, a one-time rate increase of 9%, which actually keeps you below what the overall inflation rate is for that period of time, which is great. On the 1-inch residential meter, you can see it goes up about 11%, so $55.18 to $61.23. And again, that's tied to having that larger minimum bill, or the larger 1-inch meter, so your minimum bill's increasing slightly more. Next slide, please. Commercial, what does it mean for commercial customers on the water side? You can see that for a 1-inch customer that's paying for 15,000 gallons or 15,700, their bill's going up about 9% from $64.24 to $70.29. 2-inch meter from $311 to $362, or about 16%, and then your 6-inch meter, which has a large increase in the minimum bill, but your average 6-inch customer uses right now a little over 1 million gallons a month, so their bill goes up 15%. So again, I emphasize, no one likes to see rate increases, but when you're looking at, for your water customers, even your largest increases of 15 or 16%, that really is the one increase over a 5-year period. That's keeping it on a compound basis under a 3% or slightly over a 3% rate. Next slide, please. Okay, on the wastewater side, for the residential customer, there is a good size increase there in the minimum bill from $10 to $14. So, and the 25-cent increase on the volumetric rate. So for your residential customers, they will increase from $24.09 to $28.92. So that's about a 20% increase. So that's about a 4% annual increase, actually on a compound basis, a little less than that. And then on your commercial customers, again, they're going from $220 to $237. So in absolute dollars, they're going up more, but the percentage is not as large, okay, because the increase is in the minimum bill, if that makes sense. Next slide. So policy issues to consider, and I'm almost done. Down the road, and this is not even for the 5-year period, but if you want to consider, we have a lot of our clients that are phasing out that 2,000 minimum that's included in your water. We see folks moving away from it, so you pay for every gallon of water. You pay your minimum bill, and then any water you take, you pay a volumetric rate on to encourage conservation. We've seen cities move away from it or phase moving out of it. And then revenue stability. One of the reasons we focused on minimum bill increases was, again, with these increases, it gets you up to about a 28 to 30% of your revenue is recovered through the minimum bill, and right now you're around 20 to 22%, so this increases your revenue stability. And it's in line with some targeted ranges that are set out as goals by the AWWA and the Water Environment Federation. Next slide. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Why would the percentage increases be different across the board? Why wouldn't they, other than the minimum water intake, or? Sure. How can you figure it where all the increases are the same as far as percentage-wise and accomplish the same goal?
There's a couple reasons here. Can you go back to the?
Keep going. I understand that.
No.
You know what? We have one of these. That might be easier.
There we go. All right. That's a good question.
So let's go here first of all. If you look at it, first of all, we're trying to get the minimum bills in alignment with the standards set out by the AWWA. So there's a little bit of the changes due to that. So you can see where the increases in the minimum bills are going up for the larger meters to get in alignment, okay? So what happens there, and let me go to an average bill now.
Well, go back to that, I mean, that,
Yeah.
like that from a three-quarter, a 5/8 to three-quarter meter, it's a $2.50 change, and you go to the 2-inch meter, it's 50.
It's a $50 increase, and one of the reasons is, if you look at the ratio of what we're doing there is when you have an increase in the minimum bill from $10 to $12.50, okay, that percentage, that dollar increase is exponentially goes out on the 2-inch at a greater rate, because a 2-inch meter, and I don't have it, the numbers in front of me, it's about a 16 or 18 times factor that it can draw down on. So they're able to take that much more water on their meter. So you want to have everybody paying the same proportional share towards their fixed costs or minimum bill. So if the 2-inch is able to take 16 times more water, you want them to be picking up more of that fixed cost in the same proportion to the 5/8-inch meter.
Yeah, but they're not necessarily going to use that much more minimum water through there. So basically, just because you have a 2-inch meter, you're going to be paying a bigger portion of the pie towards the system.
Right.
Just because you can use that much water if you did. I mean, so whether you use it or not doesn't mean you're going to pay for it.
Great point, but here's the thing, even if they don't use it, and this is the kicker in why these standards have been put out there, the water utility still has to size its storage and its water supply to meet that demand. So if I have a 2-inch meter, even if I don't take it, they have standards set out by the TCEQ, by the state, that they have to be able to provide water to all those meters, and it varies based on the size of the meter. So even if you don't take it, they have to build storage, the water treatment capacity, raw water rights, all those things are fixed costs that are incurred. So what I would say to water customers, and perfect example is that 2-inch residential customer, if you don't need a 2-inch meter, then pay the one-time fee for doing a change-out to the type of meter you truly need. But the bottom line is, the huge issue is you have fixed costs out there that 2-inch customer creates. Even if he doesn't take water, he creates a demand on the system by the water utility has to be ready to serve.
So you don't size all that to the infrastructure before it gets to the meter. I mean, if you have a 2-inch meter, that's fine and dandy, but if you have a 3-inch or 4-inch pipe getting to that meter, you can only pump as much water as that 4-inch pipe. Isn't it sized to that and not the meter?
The water lines are all sized to a standard to make sure you have fire flow throughout the city.
Right.
So that minimum is the same everywhere. But then your meter size is based on what you can take. So if my 2-inch meter, if you have a 5/8-inch meter, and I live right next to you, and I have a 2-inch meter, the water utility has to be able to provide that water to me through pressure in its storage tanks, elevated storage, etc. So you may just be watering and using 10,000 gallons a month. I can water and put out 100,000 gallons out with my 2-inch meter, and I'll get it.
Sure, but your bill's going to be higher than mine.
Right.
You're going to be paying more because you're using more water.
Right.
But isn't the infrastructure sized to the pipe that feeds all those meters?
The utility is charged with having a system that can meet all of the demands of all of the customers. And what drives that demand is the size of the meter, how much I can get out. I can tell you still don't like that answer.
No, but it just seems that the customers that have the larger meters paying a bigger portion of the pie because they just can get more water, and when they use more water, they pay for more water, but they're also getting penalized for being able to get more water. So,
No, and I wouldn't, here's the thing, and I wouldn't say they're getting penalized. What they're being allocated is their portion of fixed costs that at the end of the day, again, if you're a 5/8" customer and I'm a 2" customer, and I don't know where the water utility director is, he's got to spend more dollars at the end of the day to make sure I have capacity, he has capacity ready to serve me than you. And so I should pay for that. If I'm placing that demand on the city, I should pay for that.
to a degree. Because the infrastructure that's there is going to be, if it's there, unless you had 52-inch meters down the line and now we've got to go do a project, we'll say we'll put 2-inch meters and change the infrastructure, I could see it there. But if the existing infrastructure won't handle that, well, you'll say, sir, you can't have a 2-inch meter because we can't.
And you know what, and I will agree with you on that if I have a 2-inch meter and I'm not able to get adequate water pressure, then I would call and say, I think I deserve a discount off that $80, but I would bet you that the city's going to be able to provide it to me, and then I have to pay for it.
Well,
But it's a good question.
your job isn't to convince Councilmember Schneider to do something. So, that's staff's job. Along the line, or we'll just go have it in That's happened before. Ms. Jackie, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Oh, sure, yeah. Mr. Jackie, one more question, I'm sorry.
How do these rates compare to other communities in water?
Yeah, I would tell you, your rates are very comparable. We're seeing a lot of cities that are increasing their water rates right now. So if you look at where your minimum bills are and your volumetric rates are, you're right in what I call that middle area. It's very comparable. Because again, if you go back to if I go to your average bill, and I'll just look at for your water, that you're having that at $30, for the average customer. And that number we're using, that 5,400, so really it's 7,400 gallons. That's what your average residential customer has. At $29.82, it's less than $1 a day for your water. That is incredibly cheap. We have clients right now that are having to put in place inclining blocks that are looking at $7 and $8 a 1,000 gallons for their higher blocks. So that's very good. And then even with the wastewater, it's very reasonable as soon as I get there. Again, you're still under $30 or $1 a day.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Can I ask one question? Towards the end, you mentioned that communities are doing away with the minimum usage. Can you give us some examples of some cities that have done that?
I'll tell you what I can do is, I don't want to mention cities and then say it and remember, because I can't remember what those are. I tell you what I can do. I will provide to Tracy a listing of some of those cities that have phased them out, and I'll be glad to give that to her next week.
Thank you.
But yes, they are definitely doing that because it encourages conservation.
Do they also have a minimum charge when they don't have a minimum usage?
Very good question. They still have a minimum bill. When they do that, and in fact, one we just worked on, and I'll double check it, and that's part of the problem. I turned 50 last year, so my memory's not as good. But I think it was Manville we just worked with where they're phasing it out. They still keep that minimum bill. Let me emphasize, even when they go to zero water, they keep that minimum bill for that revenue stability, having that money come in to help cover fixed costs. Because again, if you look at your water, wastewater utility, on average, it's the vast majority of the costs are fixed costs They're there regardless of whether anybody's taking any water or not. And I'll send those examples to Tracy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Just let me highlight 2 or 3 things that was mentioned there. One is, again, what we're doing today is just proposal, the study that's been done. There's still a lot of work and tweaking that can be done with regard to that. As discussed today, there are no rate increases proposed for the next fiscal year in the water and sewer. There is a one-time rate increase proposed in 2014, and one of the primary cost drivers associated with that is your CIP project list, and that was mentioned in the slides also. But we went from about, again, $60+ million worth of CIP projects over the past couple of rate cycles to this one is a little more than $30 million. So we have shaved that list down somewhat, and hopefully that will still be enough to, and I think it will be, and I think I'll let Nicole respond also, but we believe that will be sufficient over the next 5 years in terms of making sure your system is maintained properly and working efficiently, and also some ability to expand the capacity of the system too. So anyway, that's the water and sewer rate study we wanted to present to you today, so we're going to look at it. I think the next item we were going to talk about was drainage. Was that the next one up? And again, I'll just, while that's being pulled up, Nicole, is it you or Michael? Michael's making his way there. Michael was going to go through the drainage utility and he put together a presentation. I appreciate the work he did on that. Just as a backdrop again, one of the issues that was brought up earlier in the year, and one that I've heard some community and council level discussion on, is our drainage utility and our drainage fund, and whether or not the approach that we're taking historically since, since 2008 anyway, relative to the projects and the project list is the way we ought to continue to be doing it. So the idea today is just to give you a brief overview of the policy and practices that are in place right now, and then let you deliberate somewhat on whether you'd like to see some changes. Michael.
Thank you, David. We're going to just go through a few slides. I think there's only about 15. And part of this is looking back in history, and then part of it's looking at what we're doing today with the drainage fee. Back in early 20s, there was some flood events that occurred back in 21 and 1929, and then another big one in the mid or late 50s. These were recorded, and but unfortunately we don't have very many flood photos from those events. We did in the early 60s start a significant drainage study, and it led to some concrete channels, some improvements, and they still remain today. Then in the 1970s we did another bit of work on Elm Creek, and then it wasn't until the early 80s that the city, as is a lot of other cities, actually started their flood insurance rate maps, and that was partly due to becoming a community that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. And then in 1993 there was a bond with some significant changes, and part of that came out of that was later in the 1990s. There was the Drainage Criteria Manual, and there were some basin studies done in 1997. 1998 was when the utility was actually created, the drainage utility, and the fee was established back then. We'll go through another slide in a minute that shows you what those fees were. And then in 2007 we did the Stormwater Management Program. That's the one that was unfunded state mandate by TCQ, and in fact we're wrapping up our 5-year program. So in 2012 this is our completion of that program. There's some stormwater best management practices that we'll be addressing this summer. One of them is the post-construction ordinance that is still a fallout from those requirements, and we'll have to maintain at least 25 or so of those of the original 34 that we started back in 2007. 2008 we had a drainage master plan update, and it identified 104 drainage projects, and in that study we also asked for fee comparison scenario, and then since that time we've completed 2 of those projects out of 104. And then in 2008 we updated our flood insurance rate maps, the D-firm, to a digital version, and that pretty well completes a walk in time. It would be interesting also to point out that something we've talked about in the past, Temple was created in 1881, if I'm correct on that. But it wasn't until the 1990s that we actually had really significant drainage criteria. So there's a 100-year gap or so, with both the flood insurance rate maps and then the drainage criteria manual. And that's not unusual either from other cities. This chart is really just intended to point out that line number 2, back in August of 2001, and there's some photos that we'll be sharing with you in the next few slides. A very significant rain event occurred in Temple. It was on the order of what we call a 1% chance or a 100-year storm. And so for Temple, that's about 10 inches in a 24-hour period, or if there's rain rates that are occurring per hour, then that would be around 4 inches an hour. So here's some photos from that event in August of 2001, and this is an area in downtown, right off of Central and Adams, I believe, and just kind of taking it all in. You can see the cars are somewhat affected by the rain that's overflowing the streets. The picture on the right that stops the stop sign and the one-way street sign, that looks to me like it's about at least a foot, maybe more, 2 feet of depth of water there. I would imagine there's some curb inlets there, and they're completely inundated, which means the storm drain pipes are full, and that's why it's overflowing. This picture takes a minute to take in. The house on the left is what we call pier and beam construction, so it's sitting up off the ground by, say, at least a foot, and yet the water is up, looks to be at least at floor level. In the backyard, it's hard to see, but there's a fence, and it's the top of the fence. It's got to be at least a 4-foot fence, if it's that. It looks to be a few inches from being completely underwater. And this is in the south central part of town. This is off of Thornton Lane. I think it's Meadow Oaks Drive, and again shows the streets are completely inundated. There's actually a curb inlet there in the center of the picture. It's totally underwater. And then this is Pepper Creek down by Adams, and if you look at it closely, it's about to top the pedestrian bridge. That is very pronounced feature in the community. And then here's Thompson subdivision, and I think since this picture was taken in 2001, there was a significant drainage project, the Thompson Creek Channel, that was put in, and that's helped that neighborhood significantly. So back in 1998, when the utility was established, the drainage fee was established. So for residential customers, it started out at $2 a month. And then in 2008, when we implemented the 5-year stormwater management plan, that was up to $2.75 a month. And as we'll indicate in a minute, that was really just to cover the cost of the program. There were no dollars allocated to capital improvement projects. And then just as last year, it was increased again up to from $2.75 to $3, and that was just enhance a little bit of the operation expenses. So, looking at it from a different perspective, the fee is currently used both for system maintenance and the purchase of capital equipment. But as it indicates on the slide, there's no funds designated for capital improvement projects. And then we have, in the use of the current funds, several different performance measures. I'll just pick out a couple. One is mowing and maintenance per year. We have over 626, or about 626 acres of channels and detention ponds that we mow. And our goal on that is about 2 to 4 times a year. And the difference being, if it's rainy, a rainy year, then we'll be mowing more often. But it's important to notice this isn't keeping it in a manicured state like you would expect on a golf course. This is just a brief chart on the org chart. We have a streets superintendent, that's the top box, and then we have a drainage crew, and that's the personnel staff that the fee supports. This chart really takes a second to take it in as well, that as David mentioned earlier during his budget briefing, over the three different scenarios, if you increase the fee back, this was from 2008, if you increase the fee from $2 up to $4, $5, $6, then you would get these kind of approaches in the rate at which you could take on projects. So basically, the more money you would be receiving through the drainage fee, then the quicker you could get through the projects. And just as a point of clarification, that top line on the far right-hand corner where it says 275, we, have completed 2 of those projects in the years that this chart was made back in 2008. We would be expecting to do about 7, so we're behind the curve. And I think I'm turning back over to David.
Thank you, Michael. Very quickly, this is the last slide, and really it's just some questions again for you to ponder as you begin to think about budget and budget policies, especially as it relates to drainage. One of them is the drainage fee. Should that remain constant, or should that maybe become somewhat dynamic as we go forward? It's set right now pretty constant, so in other words, it takes something to happen for that fee to change. You may want to leave it that way. It's just a question. But as Michael indicated, the fee has increased $1 since its adoption, and 75 cents out of that dollar was really state mandated driven. So we haven't provided much for that. The fee provides for minimal maintenance and CIP. So again, just to highlight what Michael said, it's not that we haven't done some CIP work on drainage. We certainly have. There are some projects we've been able to tackle. But on that slide before this one, or a couple back, you can see there are a lot of projects listed on the drainage plan to undertake, and at our current level of resourcing to the drainage fund, it took us about 100 or so years to get these projects out there. It'll take us about another 100 years to get them done at the current rate. Again, that's just the rate at which we're resourcing that right now. Our 2008 drainage plan scenarios assume the same increased percentages for commercial and residential. Most communities don't do it that way. Most communities have categories or modifications and a little bit more equitable participation from the commercial, because there's usually more impact from the commercial versus the residential. Again, that's some things to consider as we go forward on drainage. But again, I just wanted to present to you, because we've had some discussion over the past several months about our drainage fund, and also about our practices and policies associated with that. So we'll look forward to some more discussion on that as we go forward. Next item that I wanted to give you an overview on, I think, was streets CIP, I think was next up. And that's Nicole. I'm going to let her introduce that. You may recall also, again, back in March, I presented to you at your retreat the opportunity to consider what I was calling Streets 2012 CIP initiative. It's been several years since we've done a significant CIP initiative on our streets, and there are definitely some needs around the community associated with that. So this presentation is intended to give you an update of where we're at today, and then some recommendations at the end based on what we think the project work is as of today, as well as the financing capabilities as of today. Nicole?
Okay, we're going to go through these slides fairly quickly, but we've talked previously about our street needs and the transportation system. We really started to perform some internal assessments back in 2010 through basically just looking at our inventory and putting a rating on those streets. And that document, we call it the pavement condition assessment, and that kind of evolved into the mobility report, which pulled in some other regional documents through KTMPO efforts and some other work that had been done in the community. We talked a little bit at the planning session in February, and then we're here today to kind of give you an update on some of the projects that we're continuing to look at. So overall, our transportation needs are pretty significant. 230 is kind of the number that showed up at the bottom of the spreadsheet when we pulled everything together. And this work really is a little bit more than just streets. It also considers sidewalks, trails, and other multimodal components. Pretty significant effort. The project list that we're going to talk about today totals about $57.5 million. Teresa will talk a little bit about our debt capacity, but some projects are very significant in cost and that take a large percentage of what we're going to be talking about. So our goal is really to provide a good menu of projects that you can consider needs in the community globally. So we're really looking at everything, and we really focus on reconstruction, capacity, and connectivity. So we're going to present these in that order. And then again, obviously, we have to have the money available at the time that we want to do the work. This is an overall map of the projects we'll be talking about. As we go into each area, we'll get quite a bit closer, but you can see that the projects geographically are distributed throughout the city, and we'll talk about those as we go through these. So when we talk about streets, we're really looking at 4 different types of roads, which require different right-of-ways and different pavement sections. You can see the classifications there. The city does have a thoroughfare plan that was developed in concert with the comp plan that's updated periodically. But the arterials are 70 foot, and then of course your smaller collector and locals are less wide. So when we look at, what does a major arterial street look like, this photo or graphic kind of shows the schematic. This is just one approach. This is obviously larger than 70 foot right-of-way, but a major arterial, you might see some medians in the middle, turn lanes. Some examples around town are shown there. 3rd Adams, 5th, and both East and West Adams. So those are major arterials in our community. Stepping down from there, you've got our minor arterials. What's reflected there is 2 lanes in each direction. Some examples: Everhart, MLK, Marlinwood, and Avenue M. Collector rotary is a little bit smaller again, but these are the roads that are more of the local or collector roads that the local traffic comes onto, and the collectors take them out to the minor and major arterials. North Apache, 34th, Waterstory, and Old Waco. And then local streets, really where our neighborhoods are, where we live and spend our time after hours. Keller, 28, Stagecoach, and Wildflower, those are a few examples there. So we talk about reconstruction, capacity, and connectivity, and we'll start with reconstruction. Over time, some of our roads have declined. Our focus has really been on trying to keep the maintenance at a good level. We've been fortunate in recent years to be able to put more resources to the crack sealing and seal coat to a certain extent, but some roads are just, and especially with the drought, some roads have declined, deteriorated a little bit more. So these are 4 projects that have been identified as needing reconstruction, and we'll talk first about Kegley. Kegley Road, the section we're talking about is basically from Adams to Charter Oak, and what we've looked at is reconstructing this road in a collector configuration. That is 1 lane on each side with a center turn lane. What you see there, the trails and the sidewalks, those are shown for illustrative purposes. So it may be shown on there. They may or may not be components of the project, and we have integrated some of those into the cost, but not all of them. So, when we talked about Kegley, we do expect that there will be some multimodal components in there. One thing to note, this project is the most costly on the list. It's $14.5 million to reconstruct, and part of what contributes to the high cost are the 2 drainage ways that come through that roadway, Pepper Creek. And we'll talk a bit about bike lanes. In this particular roadway, bike lanes are important to the community. We know that through the comp plan and some of the community discussions that have happened over the years. So we have also looked about adding some pavement. We have to be 4 foot on either side, and again, that costs us about $2 million just because of the nature of the drainage ways through there. Here are just some photos of existing Kegley with the drought. The pavement has shifted, more so in some places where you have trees in the right-of-way, so if you've been down there recently, you kind of know what we're talking about. This is existing Kegley north of 2305. You can see that that is striped as 2 lanes in each direction, which is a little different from what we're proposing south of 2305. My only comment on this is really if we were to add the bike lanes and additional pavement, most likely we would consider restriping north of 2305 for consistency, so we would have multimodal components from one end to the other. This is a couple of maps that basically just show the extent of the project. So this is the longest project. It's almost 2.5 miles in length, and we do need right-of-way, so there are some impacts there. We have acquired quite a bit of right-of-way over the years, so but there is still more to be needed. And it's just kind of to point out, the drainage issues that do lend to the increased cost of Kegley, but work has been done over the years. This was a study that was done in '97, so again, this is kind of a long-term community project that just has not totally developed, but Kegley is an important project. The next one on the list is North 8th Street, or MLK. This is an interesting roadway. It's actually right now on the ground. It's a wider roadway. It's a minor arterial. But what we propose is to reduce the pavement width down to a collector, and that's what it would look like. The reason we recommend that is just because the use in the neighborhood has changed. There's no longer an active school there. So this is what it looks like now, and we would propose to reduce that pavement width. And the extent is from East Adams up to French. Next reconstruction are some roadways in the Western Hills subdivision, Antelope, Chisholm, Geronimo, Deer. There are some portions of each of those roads that have failed over time, and I think it's mostly caused by some of the soil conditions in that area. It's just kind of a difficult region to build upon, so that the soils have shifted and some of those roads need to be totally reconstructed. So when you package them all together, you're looking at a project of about $2.5 million. So here are some photos. Our crews have been out there doing what they can to restore the pavement, but in this area there's just not a lot you can do maintenance-wise. Just try to patch it and keep it leveled up. That is just a graphical depiction of all the roadways in that area that we think need to be addressed. This is not a typical reconstruction project. We lumped it into this category because it fit best, but this is North 3rd Street, and what we've identified this roadway as an enhancement. Basically, with redevelopment of the corridor North 3rd and that gateway to our community, we think it would be a good idea to kind of look at improving the look of that road. Now, it is a TxDOT road, and so we would need to work in partnership with TxDOT. But something we've talked about doing is possibly installing some sidewalks and then taking out the medians all in the middle, just because it doesn't function probably as best as it should be. So, and y'all are familiar with the work that TISD is doing, and so we think it would be a project that would be important to look at. This is a photo of just kind of the north end of that project. Again, this just shows the extent of the work. Set basically south of Industrial and down to Royal. We move on to capacity and connectivity. And we've tried to group these. The green projects are capacity, the red are connectivity. And we'll go through each one of these roads. Really, they're interrelated and connected, which is kind of why we've grouped them together. We'll go through each one of these. So, South Pea Ridge Road is an important collector road, and one portion of that road from Adams south to Tarver was completed several years ago. What this project is basically to extend that work to the south, not as an arterial as exists north of Tarver, but more as a collector, because that's what we see this road as being. And this project is about $1.25 million. The top two photo, or the top left photo, that's a photo of the roadway that's improved just south of 2305, and then the other photos are south of Tarver, and those show how that roadway necks down toward the south. This is the just a graphical look of where that project resides approximately. Next project we've looked at is Hogan. Again, it's a collector roadway from 317 to South Pea Ridge. This is also an important project, and the cost for this is a little over $2 million. On the left-hand side, you see that I think that Souterbrook subdivision. That's a fairly new subdivision. Off to the left on the south side, we're basically looking at taking out that existing county-style roadway and replacing it with curb and gutter collector street. Interestingly, on this project, we have most of the right-of-way. What's in green there indicates those areas that we don't need any right-of-way. The area in red is that portion that we think we probably do need right-of-way, so that's the extent of that project. Tarver Road, this is actually a connectivity project. And right now, Tarver Road dead ends a little bit, I guess that would be east of South Pea Ridge. So this project proposes to basically extend Tarver Road all the way over to Old Waco Road. We have half of the right-of-way there. We'll need the other half. So this is kind of what it looks like now. And on the lower right-hand side, that just kind of shows how that project would expand into Old Waco Road. And again, there's a wanted to show this just to illustrate that plans have been prepared on this in association with the Outer Loop project. So engineering work has been done. The other thing I need to mention also is that with each one of these projects we're assessing the utility impacts, and so water and wastewater certainly on several of these will be a component, and those costs have tried to be captured in relationship with the rate study that we just heard about. So talking transportation and utilities, lots of things to consider with a roadway project. On the north side of West Adams, we've got North Pea Ridge Road. This also is a county-style roadway, which has declined over the years. This is important because with passage of the BISD projects up in that area, the buses will be traveling this direction. There's already some existing campuses up there, but this is a heavily used roadway, and so we think this is an important project. Excuse me. Those are just some photos. On the north side, that's north of Adams, and then that's on the right-hand side, that's a little further north, so you can kind of see the way those pavements look. And the campus, they're kind of in the center, is an existing, I think it's an elementary campus, and then at the top of the picture, at the intersection of Prairie View and North Pea Ridge, that's a proposed future school site. So Prairie View Road, this is actually the first roadway that we're showing that's identified as a minor arterial. This is a larger road on the thoroughfare plan. And this project is significant cost. It's about $7 million, but right now this is what it looks like. But we can see traffic increasing quite significantly with with the development that's happening out there, both related to the schools and then also residential and commercial. So this project actually goes all the way from 317 and ties into Research Parkway. So that's kind of an interesting project to see how that ties back into the outer loop. Westfield Boulevard, this is also a minor arterial. This is a north-south way, and a little over $5 million, the same type of project that Prairie View is. Right now, it pretty much dead ends there at Stone Hollow, and what this project would do would be to tie that into State Highway 36. West Avenue U and the 13th, 17th Street corridor. These are TMED related projects, and I think the vision that's kind of been established is to try to connect those medical facilities in a multimodal fashion. And so these two projects kind of get us going in that direction. Scott and White is on the left-hand side, the VA is on the right-hand side, Temple College is kind of on the south. And this project actually proposes to do a portion of each roadway. So, and that would also provide another route from those medical facilities back directly to the loop. West Avenue N. This is actually a local roadway, which has been looked at to support redevelopment of the Travis campus. And right now there's no roadway there, but what's on the drawing boards is, as y'all know, some multi-partnership efforts with Ralph Wilson and TISD, and so with this project we would be establishing a roadway from 19th to 23rd to provide for circulation on the north end of that campus. And so that's a look on the photo of what that looks like. And we thought it was important to at least talk about the outer loop. The community has done significant work over the years in this area. We finished construction on the last section a few years ago, which is a real asset. But this roadway proposes to build Phase 3, which is that section from West Adams south to Jupiter, or really Tarver, where the Tarver roadway would connect. It would be very similar in nature to what's north of 2305, basically extending the outer loop that much further south. And that's a depiction of where that would start and stop. And this is actually a trail, an off-site connector trail project. This might be getting close to the end of the capacity connector, but even though this is not a roadway project, it does link multimodal nodes throughout the community. And so what we're saying is if all these roadways are built as potentially they could be, then you would want to finish those trail connections, east-west connectivity and north-south, to kind of tie everything in together. Moving on to the OTV maintenance. OTV is outside the budget, and this is really an effort to address those things that aren't currently funded through the regular budget. Signals, a very important part of the system, overlays and seal coats. And for signals, we actually do have several locations that have met warrants that just haven't been funded yet. You can see those listed. And then we know from historically that there will be other locations that will need signals as well, and so we've tried to build in some option there for future growth. And then when it comes to seal coat and overlays, currently we are doing some work this year, and in fact within the next couple of weeks y'all will see some contracted seal coat contractors going out there throughout our community to put down about $1 million worth of seal coat. And so if you remember back to previous briefing, we talked about the importance of making sure that the moisture is not getting underneath your base, because you want to protect that. And so you start your maintenance by crack sealing, and then you come back with the seal coat, and then eventually you overlay. You do your milling and your overlay. And so with this map kind of shows visually what $1 million a year would look like. Now, our pavement report showed that based upon our inventory and the approach that is typically taken to try to restore your pavement surfaces, you need about $3 million a year. What we're showing here is about $1 million a year, and how much we could buy for our money by restoring those surfaces around town that haven't been restored in a while. And kind of in summary, these are the numbers, and I'm gonna turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Nicole. Just real quickly, I think I've got 3 slides left on this, or about that, yeah, 3 slides. Just to kind of summarize the potential street projects, and again, we divided these into reconstruction, capacity or connectivity, and then what I called OTV, or outside the budget, stuff that we just can't do on an annual operating budget, that periodically we need to infuse some additional capital into. You take all those together, as we identified those back in March, I think it was roughly around that number. I didn't pull that up, but I want to say it was around $50 or $55 million that we identified on that project list. The work that we've done since then, we've identified the list that Nicole just went over. If you total all that stuff up, you're going to be about $57.4 million. Next slide. If we were to take, and I think also back in March, you may recall, we talked about trying to work within our existing capacity, so that if there was, and really present you a couple of options as we got further along, and that's what I'm intending to do right now. At that point in time, we didn't know how much capacity was going to be available with no tax rate impact or no impact, and just using existing debt restructuring. And I'll let Tracy address some of this here more specifically if you'd like to talk about it further today. But potentially, we can do about $33 million worth of project work with no increase in just restructuring and moving forward. If we do that, and there is no rate increase or tax rate increase or tax impact, then that's the project list that I would propose for you that you want to potentially consider. And very briefly, what that means, just in high level, the reconstruction projects, I didn't touch those. I think the reconstruction projects are the highest priority. Whatever you're willing to move forward with, as a council, I would suggest that the reconstruction projects have to be on any list, because those are just that. They're roads that are failing and roads that need to be addressed. The second priority, I probably should have put those in a little bit different order, I think is your outside the budget maintenance projects. You really need to fund those. I've tweaked those a little bit, though, to make them work so that we can add some of the capacity and connectivity, but I really do think that your OTB maintenance and projects are probably the second highest priority on that list, maybe even concurrent with the reconstruction. So those are 2 that I would say, almost no matter what, we need to get something in both those areas done. And then with regard to capacity and connectivity, North Pea Ridge, Prairie View, Avenue U, and West Avenue N are what I would put on that list. If others have to fall off the list because of funding constraints, then those are the ones that I would suggest we need to address. And those are addressed primarily, really 3 of the 4 on the capacity and connectivity list are related to ISD projects and work that the ISDs I know are moving forward with and have funding to move forward with. And if we don't address those to some degree, we're going to have some challenges in the future, in the very near future, as a result of work that they'll be doing in those areas. So that's my rationale for having those on the list and maybe the others not on the list. Next slide. If you want to stick with the original, sort of the original project list, our best guess right now, and again, I'm going to give Tracy an opportunity to talk here in just a moment, but it's probably a little bit more than a penny on the tax rate if you want to consider basically everything that Nicole presented to you today. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. I think the projects that we've identified and the need for those and the benefit for having the capacity and connectivity projects that we have on that list are multifold. No doubt about that at all. It really is just a matter of funding and what we think we can do and when we think we can do it. Next slide. And that's, again, just a visual of those projects across the city, and I'd be happy to address any questions. Let me do real quickly, before I turn it over, well, let me see if Tracy, would you like to make any comments about that?
Just a quick comment. I think we went over this in detail back in our work session in February. Just want to remind you again that this is a multi-year plan. It stretches through 2018, so it's 5 years. The debt when David mentions a tax increase, that's one time over the next 5 years. And all of this is based on, we have firmed up several of the assumptions we used earlier because we were assuming the pass-through would be X amount at X rate. But today we wrapped all of that up and our new numbers, new schedules reflect that. But again, all of this is based on assumptions that our tax rate will grow at X rate, which we're using 3%. We're also assuming that our debt will, when we issue these bonds, they'll be at X%, which is, we use 50 basis points above what we think it's going to be. And I tell David over and over, you got to align your projects with the debt service that's listed in these schedules. So.
And she has reminded me of that frequently. I get it, I understand that. We got to have money to pay for the projects.
Well, they got to align to.
And the money's not going to all come in at the same time, so I understand that. So we would have to certainly, it is again, somewhat complex proposal in terms of trying to line all this up and make sure the projects and the project work and the financing all are in sync. But I am confident we can do that if that's what council directs us to do, and we can move forward with that. So, two quick comments, and then we'll move on to the next briefing item. The project that we presented here again are potential street projects, and what I'm looking for over the next couple or 3 weeks is I intend to address these in your budget. When I file the budget on June 29th, I'll have some specific recommendations in there, and I'm just kind of looking for your sense of projects and also project funding in terms of what level you want to go to. Again, not looking for that today, but this is where we're at as of today and the work that we've done since March on the projects. Okay?
Questions, comments? What do we got on recycling? How much longer?
I think we can do recycling in about 15 minutes. Is that good for you? Okay. Nicole?
Okay, most of y'all probably seen most of these slides, so I'll go through them fairly quickly, but we have been in this pilot program since last summer. Basically, we're using our current trucks, and we're talking about commingled recycling program. On phase 1, we started it back in July, and it is still ongoing. Phase 2 was on the east side of town. That was started in January, and that continues to be ongoing. This is kind of the area of phase 1. Basically, be west of Canyon Creek, along Canyon Creek, down in that area. It's about 1,200 homes here, and when we talked a little bit about the metrics, we'll talk about what the numbers show. Phase 2, essentially that's south of Adams and north of the railroad tracks, basically east of MLK. Again, about 1,200 homes. And so both of these pilot programs were started last year to kind of look at, the interest and the viability of going citywide with a curbside program. And we've gotten really good information, I would say, exactly what we want, because we want through this pilot program, we want as much, the best information as we can to be able to assess and make recommendations as we go forward. So phase 2 was a little bit smaller, a little over 900 homes, and we had mixed results. So we had a high level of participation in phase 1 and not so high in phase 2. We did have weekly meetings, monthly meetings, so we had 3 in each area, and finished up with an update at the end. And throughout the project, we've been looking at the numbers weekly. We do have partners in this. Phase 1, Waste Management provided some containers through their contract, and Temple Iron Metal is our other partner. They are actually processing and transporting the materials. So basically, real different results for the same type of program in different parts of the city. And so basically, it's a simple recycling program where we collect all of these items, pretty standard items, into a separate container that each resident has, and then the trash has gone to once a week with recycling on the second day of the week. And here are just a few photos kind of showing how that works in the alleys and on the street. And we try to select pilot areas to be diverse so that we're looking at as many different operational issues as might be out there, so we can make our best assessment on the program. Just kind of a look at what Temple Iron and Metal facility looks like when that material is dropped off. So we're using our same trucks, the same drivers, a couple of loads a day. And then they bundle those commodities up and they ship them out. Right now, the city is not receiving any revenue from that. Really, through the partnership, Temple Iron and Metal was willing to help us figure out if this was going to be something that would have some legs. And so part of that partnership was that we just wanted to know if this was going to work on their end. So we looked at several different metrics throughout the program. They're listed there, and we'll kind of look at each one. But the customers who participated on Phase 1 was pretty high. And when you look at participation rates, you have to look at it somewhat globally. We run numbers weekly and also monthly, but when you look at all the containers that are set out, not everybody will put their recycling containers out every week, and so you might have lower numbers one week and higher another. And so we try to aggregate this a little bit and really get to the bottom of what the numbers are telling us. Another important component is, how much material can we keep out of the landfill? Of course, it saves on our landfill life, which helps control the cost long-term for expansion, and then also it saves some tipping fees. And so there's real value in keeping those materials out. And of course, you want those materials to be of high quality, so that was another component. Mixed paper and plastics and cans were really the primary commodities that were tracked. Just a couple slides here kind of showing visually what the numbers look like. The green is Phase 1, the red is Phase 2. That's customer participation monthly, by month. And then on the landfill diversion, those are kind of the comparisons there. And then when you look at commodities, the greenish colors are the paper, and then the pinkish colors, the first two bars are the paper, south side and east side, and then the last two are the cans. So a lot more paper is collected than cans. You kind of see that. So throughout the program, we did have try to have as much communication with our customers as possible. Emails, Facebook, website, try to put out media releases, different things. And so we have kind of opened up the dialogue and welcome any kind of comments that the community might have. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Nicole. I also thanks Nicole for working on several of these presentations and talking here. As you can see, a lot of public works involvement in lots of areas, and to Lisa for the work they're doing in solid waste, in particular on curbside. We sort of see three options at this point. I think when we started our pilot programs, we told you that we come back to you about every 90 days or so. We have to kind of assess and see where we're at. We could, at this point in time, we have two pilot areas out there, south side and east side. We could go citywide on the program, which is one option. Another option is we could expand the pilot program to add additional collection areas or additional route areas. Or a third option is we could discontinue the pilot program altogether and go back to the same service that the other 18 routes in the city are receiving right now. Next slide. Option 1, full-blown citywide curbside recycling. Components, a big component of that is container purchases. You've got to go buy these containers, and they're about around $50 or so a container. We've got to educate, deliver, and then we got to execute on all that. And then we also, when we go, if we go citywide, we have to, our recommendation, or my recommendation is going to be that we really need to go through a process for selecting our recycling partner. And that's not saying anything negative at all toward our current partner and the work they've done with us on the pilot effort. But if we do expand this citywide, we really do want to go through a RFP type process. We do have multiple interested parties if we are going to do that, so that in and of itself merits at least a look at that process. And our estimated cost for going citywide is around $1 million, and that's simply the containers. We've got to purchase some containers if we do that. Second slide, please. Option 2 is expand the current pilot program and add a couple more routes. Gather some additional data. That would provide about another 4,000 home experience for us. Right now, we've got, as Nicole mentioned, about 1,000 customers in each of the other two, so we'd add a few more, and that would give us a total of about 4,000 homes, or about 20% of our entire service area. And again, same components. The estimated cost for that is about $120,000, and that's the containers. And the last option 3, is discontinue the pilot program. I would send Nicole to the south side to tell them we would be doing that. And we resume twice a week garbage collection for all areas of the city. And the last slide, my recommendation to you at this point in time is that we do option 2. Let's expand the pilot program, continue the pilot program in both the existing areas on the south and east side. While I've not formally and finally selected the 2 additional areas, I will tell you that the areas that I'm looking at are the north side and the west side, so that when we finish the pilot programs this time around, we would have 1 pilot from each quadrant of the city. And with that, I think that's my last slide. Is it not? It is the last slide. So that's the presentation on the curbside. Again, that's a component of your budget as we go in, because I've got to address that $120,000 for those containers. But again, I wanted to give you an opportunity to see where we're at as of today with regard to the 2 pilot areas, and then what at least my recommendation is at this moment as we go into budget for expanding the pilot program. I will close with, I got 3 comments I'll close on. First is thanks for the time today. I appreciate you letting me expand the special meeting time to talk about some budget issues and areas that I'm actively working on and that you'll be seeing again as you get your budgets next month. Each of these areas that you're briefed on today will be addressed in the budget. So water and sewer, drainage, curbside recycling, street CIP, and of course a multitude of other issues, but these are certainly some significant issues. So I did want to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the things that I'm looking at as I final in on the recommended budget. I would appreciate your thoughts and direction in the coming days and weeks here as I move forward on that, so that I'm in sync with your thoughts as I prepare the budget. And then finally, all of the presentations that we made today are already loaded in your drop boxes, so when you get back to those, you can pull all those up and look at those at your leisure. Be happy to address any questions you might have, and again, thanks to staff for all the work they've done.
On the curbside recycling, and you talk about this as budget for 2013, if in fact we're able to negotiate with our current partner, if that's what you're going to do, is stay with the current partner in executing option 2, which is merely an expansion, can we do this prior to the budget? Do we need to wait 6 months? Can we go ahead and implement in another area, get the containers, and if there's a revenue sharing, use that as the opportunity to make that purchase, so that then there's a modification of the budget on the revenue and the expense side, so that we can move forward and not wait another 6 months?
Sure, we can certainly do that. And we have had some discussions with our current partner about 2 things. One is, does he have the ability or capability to receive 2 additional routes? And secondly, at this point in time, we'd like to also begin discussions on a pilot basis, perhaps, for some revenue sharing agreement, because the routes it will double. We'll go from 2 to 4. And I think he's receptive to yes on the first question. Yes, he does believe he has the capacity to receive 2 more routes. And yes on the interest on the revenue sharing agreement. So I do think there's an opportunity to offset some of the costs associated with those containers with that arrangement. And yes, we can proceed more quickly than the 2013 budget in that area too, if that's council's desire.
Any questions or comments? Yeah, let me say thanks to, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's amazing how much goes into it, and the staff has really done a great job there, of course, with our good leadership. A lot to look at.
Absolutely. I'd like my appreciation for the time today. Thank you all very much. Thanks to those who've attended. Appreciate you being here. Congratulations to those on the Northwest Loop again. Thank you, Bill, for all the great work from your firm, and congratulations to James. Nicole, thank you very much to you and Michael for the preparation and the presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing else on this agenda. We will stand adjourned.